That's all you forgot to say?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Bran Stark is a character from the A Song of Ice and Fire books and the TV show Game of Thrones. And he's a character that went a bit strange. He deviates massively from the book storyline, which is absolutely fine to do, and there are some good reasons to deviate from the book. The problem is, doing that means you have to write a new arc to replace it, and what we got instead for Bran had problems. It went wrong. I wanted to pinpoint when that happened and why. Look, I made a load of these videos on other characters now. Criticising Game of Thrones for its later seasons is a bit like low-hanging fruit, but it doesn't stop it being fascinating to pick apart how such a successful show could fall apart as dramatically as it did, and in many ways, Bran is the best example for it, so let's just start. I think we first have to say that Bran started out pretty well in the show. Whilst he rarely gets a huge amount of scenes, and I don't think he carries the same thematic importance as he does in the books, he does still consistently have a storyline across the first several seasons. We're going to summarise it. In season 1, he doesn't have as vivid characterisation as the other Starks. He is basically just presented as a sweet boy, and also that he likes climbing, but that works fine in season 1. Being just a pretty standard sweet kid works well when his story is all about the dark tragedy that can befall someone good and innocent who just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Season 1 is good. He falls from a tower. When he wakes up, he is understandably miserable, but also plagued by these strange dreams of a three-eyed raven, which they changed from a three-eyed crow in the books. He's very much the anchor for Winterfell after everyone else leaves, though. He bounces between scenes with Robb, Theon, Hodor, Osha, Luwin, Rickon. Through his child eyes, he holds that entire section of the story together, and then season 2 is also quite strong. He's beginning to experience some wolf dreams, but then Winterfell is attacked by Theon, which is one of my favourite plot lines I think in the show for how tragic it is, both from Bran's and Theon's perspectives. He then sees Winterfell burned, Luwin dies, it's a real childhood is over kind of moment, and he then takes his advice to travel to Jon at the Wall. In season 3 we meet Jojen and Mira Reed, who help Bran start to understand his dreams, and they also provide a bit of small conflict because Osha doesn't trust them. Osha is concerned about the magic, she's concerned about going beyond the wall, and we are now approaching a fork in the road for Bran, where he is torn between following the three-eyed raven or finding Jon. Which one is he going to choose later down the line? And admittedly, this conflict and the one with Osha they could have done a lot more with, but it's fine. As we approach the end of the season, they almost get to see Jon outside a mill where they're hiding, only they can't see him because he's fighting wildlings and there's danger. Bran is forced to walk into Hodor to keep him quiet, which is a great moment because it's successful for them. It feels like a good thing for Bran, but it also has incredibly dark implications for the future, the power to walk into other people. If there's any clear problem, I think it's probably Rickon, who has never had anything to do, understandably to begin with, because the actor Art Parkinson was very young, but he's aging quicker in the show than he does in the books, and yet he still doesn't really get that much voice. And then Osha and Rickon just split from Bran to visit the Umbers instead, and they aren't heard from again for ages and ages. It should mean a lot really, breaking away from your brother. But I don't think Rickon's ever been enough of a character for that to be the case, which is also kind of a problem in the books to be fair, but still. I'd say it's season 4 where we start to really get some cracks emerging, because Bran is walking into summer more and more. Jojen and Mira are a bit concerned about this. They warn him if he becomes a wolf too often, he could be stuck that way, he could lose himself. And that should be quite an ominous warning, but largely this will come to absolutely nothing. There's no great danger of conflicts there. And it's because David and Dan had the unenviable dilemma when it came to Bran from season 4 onwards. In the books, Bran becomes increasingly dark and beastly, wolf-like. He eats other human bodies while he's a wolf, and you do feel him losing some of his humanity, culminating in the 5th book where he may or may not eat Jojen. Personally, I believe that theory. It's out there if you don't know it. But I think translating that into TV would mean lots of scenes of a child actor eating the remains of other children, which is very dark. I mean, don't get me wrong, Game of Thrones is supposed to be dark, and there are lots of other, arguably even more dark things than the show. But I can understand some reluctance either from them or executives about sending Bran down that route. I think that's kind of fair enough. My complaints aren't that they don't do that. My complaint is if you remove that, you remove Bran's central conflict, a once sweet, innocent boy slowly losing his humanity and the struggle to preserve it. Can he preserve it? David and Dan pull out a lot of that struggle, but we're still left with all of the breadcrumbs that had previously been leading Bran in that direction. So suddenly you've got a lot of build-up without any payoff. It's jarring. And secondly, what arc do you give him instead? The majority of Bran this season just involves him being captured by Carl Tanner, which, you know, I've talked before about not liking that plotline in the show, but it does make some logical sense to tie Bran and Jon's plots together once more and have a moment where Bran decides to veer from his path when he realises Jon needs help. He wants to be there with Jon, but doing that is what gets him captured and risks everything. Afterwards, he decides again not to pursue Jon, but to head north towards the Three-Eyed Raven, which is solid enough as an arc, but it also kind of repeats Season 3's arc, and it doesn't carry that much weight. Jojen then dies on the way to the Three-Eyed Raven, aka Blood Raven, and we then end the season having just reached somewhere interesting. Stage set for the next season. Also, we earlier had Bran walking into Hodor again, this time to fight as Hodor and kill Locke, which is another good moment of build-up. Bran getting to feel warging is crucial for survival, is a good thing there, despite dark implications behind it. That is the best kind of sense of darkness we do get in Bran's story. And then, I would say the first proper moment that ruined Bran's character. Ruined is quite a strong word, but you know, I would say that came in Season 5, or was Season 5. Because Bran didn't appear at all. It makes some sense, because as David and Dan argued, if Season 5 had Bran learn everything he needed from Bloodraven, learn about Jon's parents, then be forced to leave again and head to Castle Black, he would arrive too early. His arc would be ahead of everyone else's timelines. And if he only did half of that one season and then half the next season, it might feel like his story 5 went nowhere, had no kind of concluding arc of its own. So ideally what you need to do is create more of an arc for Bran, so that he can spend both Season 5 and 6 with Bloodraven. And I think in terms of the sheer amount that does need to change with Bran's character, I think an extra season was necessary for him. How very different Bran is once becoming the Three-Eyed Raven, I think to do all of that just in Season 6 feels very rushed and much more plot heavy than character focused. Having stuff in Season 5 would have helped a lot with that, but adding that extra season's worth would also be very hard to write without losing momentum, because it does still effectively mean just sitting around in one spot with a few people for 2 seasons straight. Not impossible to write, but when you're reluctant to explore the darkness within Bran, it becomes difficult. And also when David and Dan are reluctant to explore magic as a whole within the world of Ice and Fire, that also makes it difficult. And the fact Jojen has already been killed. I think if you'd saved his death a bit later down the line, that could have been a great beat within Season 5. That could have been earned and might affect things for Bran as a character. You don't have to have Bran eat him or anything, but make some kind of decision that costs Jojen his life and leaves Mira very unhappy with Bran. Jojen dying should have been a big loss. One where Bran is now torn between grief and focusing on his mission, but he dies just somewhat heroically. It's a very convenient death. It happens right at the end of Season 4, and then we have an entire season pass without checking in with Bran at all, by which time we've kind of forgotten about Jojen, and the grief that could have been there is softened as a result. Jojen dies when it is plot convenient for him to die, but in terms of character development for Bran, it's very inconvenient for his death to just happen like that. So I think arguably there's 2 points there that damage Bran's character. One is Jojen's death happening where it does, where it can't be mined for character and emotional impact, and 2 is just not writing a Season 5 arc at all. It does leave a jarring gap, it does make Season 6 very rushed, and when this is a massive change happening in Bran, becoming the Three-Eyed Raven, becoming a bit of a robot, let's say, it happens so fast that it doesn't mean anywhere near as much to us as it should. Because we didn't get to properly explore that change and what it means and to sit alongside Bran whilst that was happening, it then becomes very difficult to continue empathising closely with him in season 7 or 8. We're now a bit more removed from him. It becomes a bit of a walking, or talking, let's say, plot device. And I've been charitable there to say that the development was rushed, because it's not really even that. This is Bran in his final scene of season 6.
Are you sure you're ready for this?
I'm the three-eyed raven now. I have to be ready for this.
He's still Bran, he's still human, then he touches this tree, we get a montage of him seeing stuff but we don't really see him again. Then from his first appearance in season 7 he talks like this.
You've seen the army of the dead. You've seen the Night King. He's coming for us, for all of us.
And that's him fixed for the rest of the show, so it's not so much rushed development as development happening off screen. It's so frustrating, you know, if you started this change gradually in season 5 and you reached that point by the end of season 6 more naturally, it'd have made Bran so much better. We would have been able to continue following him as a character, but even as it is, they could have explored it more in season 7 if they needed to. You know, Bran does say this to Sansa.
It's all pieces now. Fragments. I need to learn to see better.
But in a way it's expressed in the fact we don't then have other scenes and moments like this in the story. These are just words, without any tangible internal conflict. You know, if you had Bran say this in a very distressed voice, if you gave us a sense that this is a person haunted by all of these fragments, gradually struggling to find some clarity, aware he is shedding himself and being both terrified of that, but also aware it's what he needs to do. Just give us some of that, even a minor sense of that, and Bran would have continued to be a character rather than a plot device, but they don't. The change pretty much happens off screen. He vaguely says this stuff in this one scene, but who Bran is and how he might change has already been fixed and will stay that way for the rest of the show. I think the only real thing Bran's possibly got going for him at this point in the story is him walking into Hodor and what that might mean. As a power, it should be huge. If Bran has the potential to hack into people's brains, that is frightening for how he might develop and what violating people like that might do to even Bran. I think people like Jojen and Mira and Osha should have been seeking some kind of mental protection, wary of possible mind breaches out there. They should seek some kind of security. Psychological security. This video is sponsored by NordVPN. Yes, it is. The fastest VPN on the planet. Is that right? The fastest? Yes, it is! Look, we've all been on YouTube. I assume you know VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and that it can help to protect you from online threats, surveillance, and censorship with their encrypted tunnels and DNS filtering and all of that stuff. I have NordVPN just running whenever I boot up my computer. It can be very handy trying to access shows and films on Netflix, for example, that they don't include on the UK version of the site, but you might use it to help access sites blocked in your country, or if your bandwidth speed is being throttled, or for cybersecurity. And I like NordVPN not just because I get a cool map, but because A, one account can protect up to 10 devices, B, the speed, C, it comes with Threat Protection Pro. It checks your downloads for malware, it blocks websites that are fake, malicious, used for phishing, it blocks pop-ups, ads, and D, they have a dark web monitor that can continuously scan the dark web to see if your details appear anywhere up for sale. When I first got it, it said there were 2 leaks from my personal email, so I had a big freak out and changed every password for everything. Oh, which is probably where I should mention NordPass, which you get free with NordVPN for storing all your passwords safely and even generating new ones. There's also a 24/7 live chat for getting help. I'd never used it, so I decided to try it out for the sake of this. I told the bot I needed a real person, and look at that. Reply in 10 seconds. Thanks, Raphael. I'm afraid I don't actually need anything. NordVPN are just sponsoring one of my videos, and I wanted to test out the live chat, so I can show people how quickly you respond. You were very quick. Sorry for wasting your time though. But look, try it out for yourself with a 30-day money-back guarantee. They've also got a massive discount going, offering you 4 extra free months, so use my link, nordvpn.com/fort3, that you can find in the description or in the pinned comment, and see what you think. Yep. Yes, sorry, Where was I? Hodor. This whole warging into Hodor business is the biggest thing Bran's storyline has going for it at this point, and it does reach a very dramatic conclusion with the hold the door scene. An idea George R. R. Martin was planning in the books and shared with them, and it's great. One of the best scenes from the late season, if not the best. Bran discovers the horrifying reality of what his warging can do. He left a man psychologically damaged to the point he can only say the word Hodor. It's horrible, it's moving, it should have a massive impact on Bran, but does it? Does it change anything? Apart from, you know, being a very dramatic scene and now Hodor is no longer in the show. I would kind of hope to see Bran horrified by what he's done. Perhaps guilty, perhaps angry, perhaps turning away from his path, deciding he's not going to warg any longer. But no, there are no real consequences to this scene and no greater impact. Which is arguably one of the biggest criticisms people levy at David and Dan as a whole, that their approach to the show was far too concerned with presenting big scenes, big dramatic cinematic moments, rather than a cohesive story. The one real plot point they had been building up for several seasons, the one that has the power to really affect who Bran is as a person, and then causes kinda nothing. It's so anticlimactic. So, we touched on Bran becoming a robot earlier, how very suddenly it happens, mostly off screen, how we never get time to explore it, see Bran's own distress at losing himself, nothing that could keep us emotionally engaged with the character. Even then though, there is still the potential to see Bran from an outside perspective, the viewpoints of other people around him, how Bran affects them, and we have problems there too. I think the only two ways this change is a satisfying narrative to watch is A, if it's incredibly tragic to see Bran lose his humanity, or B, we're watching him become somewhat villainous. And I'm going to touch on the villainous point later on. For now we can just say Bran doesn't really become villainous. He's not. He is seen as a good person. We're meant to see him as a good person. Yes, he's becoming very weird and slightly baffling to some people who knew him before, but that's kind of it. He's the three-eyed raven. He's trying to fight the Night King. He is good. Which also is very one-dimensional in a show that thrived on nuanced characters, because, you know, Bran could be both fighting for a good cause and also going about it in a questionable, very manipulative, brain-controlling, dream-inducing way. There's a version of this story where Bran could have been like the Emperor from Baldur's Gate 3. So that's what I'd say about villainy. In terms of tragedy, to see Bran's loss of himself, to see that sweet kid completely disappear, consumed by all of these events in time he is able to witness. For that to feel tragic, it requires an outside perspective who reacts with concern about Bran, who does feel tragedy, perhaps even questions the morality of some of what Bran does. And in this sense, I think one of the biggest problems for Bran as a character is actually Mira Reed. I would argue one of the reasons they struggled to write a season 5 arc is partly because they hadn't developed a much more nuanced, deep dynamic between Bran, Mira and Jojen. A lot of the time she's just someone who helps Bran with his disabilities, but there's a long portion of the story where it is basically just her and Bran, and the two don't have much going for them. There's not much depth to their feelings about each other. I think the real friction there could have been between them, her grief over Jojen's death. There's not a huge deal made about that. She never really butts heads. Nothing really changes in their relationship. She just stays with him, takes him all the way back to Castle Black, has little impact on Bran to change him as a person, and then she kind of just says bye. You know, that's a bit harsh. I mean, she does comment on how much she thinks Bran's changed.
My brother died for you. Hodor and Summer died for you. I almost died for you. Bran,
I'm not really. Not anymore.
you died in that cave.
But nothing really happens about that fact. There's no development or meaning to extract there. She is just a useful helper when Bran needs her, and then neatly removed from the story when he doesn't. And it's a massive shame. She, more than anyone, has prime position in the story to really, A, make us think about how much Bran is changing, B, extract some sort of meaning from that, and C, just create some narrative tension there. Oh no, is Bran losing his humanity? Is he actually doing that? Is this just the effects of his abilities, or is he losing something very important? Be concerned, audience, have some conflict and tension about this fact. No. Mostly, we're just led to accept the change as a bit odd, but still something we should accept. Bran's the three-eyed raven. This is what happens. This is necessary to fight the Night King. Don't think too much about it. I think we need some kind of tension and conflict where we're not sure if Bran is going to lose his way. And even his siblings, who are best equipped to try and reach Bran, reach his heart. That's just repetitive scenes of people speaking to him and Bran reacting like the three-eyed raven and them just going, oh, okay then. The most striking and uncomfortable one is obviously Sansa. A very bizarre scene where, to prove his powers, Bran tells Sansa she looked beautiful the night she suffered SA. Ugh. Not only is it another moment that plays into the gratuitous way the show tends to look at Sansa and her suffering, but also, if Bran is really going to say that's his choice of words, then why are there no scenes of Sansa or Arya or Jon being like, I'm really worried about Bran, this isn't right, should we be doing something? Why isn't Sansa concerned and upset about this beyond just her reaction within the scene? Her brother watched that and told her she was beautiful. Why does this fact mean nothing else in the story? Just makes me kind of shudder, you know? But yes, we've got Jojen's early death, we've got the lack of dynamic with Mira, the lack of, well, anything in Season 5, Hodor's death lacking consequences, how rushed Season 6 becomes, the lack of exploration about Bran's change, all of it making things very hard to really explore anything about Bran from Season 7 onwards. What other moments do I think damage him? Well, there's one other thing to discuss. Bran is made king at the end of the series because who has a better story than the boy who wasn't even in the show for one of the seasons? It doesn't make much sense, especially when he's never expressed any interest in the crown. We've been led to believe he didn't want it. However, it's not this decision itself that's the issue, because there are a multitude of scenarios in which Bran becoming the king could make sense. I've already hinted at a version of Bran a bit like the Emperor from Baldur's Gate 3. I think that would be a very fitting way to explain why Bran might end up taking the throne and how he would go about doing that. That's where just a little bit of villainy coming into his story might be useful. I think Bran becoming the king is even in George R.R. Martin's plans for the books, but the problem is precisely that it doesn't make sense considering the arc we've seen in the show so far. I mean, all I have to do is ask the question, what kind of king would Bran be in the show? I don't know. I mean, I suppose we see a glimpse of it after the fact, but generally we have no idea because Bran has shown no interest and he's shown no big examples of using political power, of leadership, of strategy. Would he use his abilities to manipulate in a sinister but effective fashion? Would there be a little bit of villainy there? Would he use those abilities to win the throne in the first place? Why would he want it? What is his motivation? I honestly don't know any of it because nothing was set up there. If your plan is to make Bran king, then he needs to start doing things that seem kingly or politically devious, either of the two. But I don't think he really got to do anything the last few seasons other than warg into things for the sake of learning plot points and then telling people how they need to focus on fighting the Night King. Again, there is no character here and no one reacts to this decision like he is a character. There's no, hang on, can someone as powerful as Bran be trusted with a throne? No, everyone just says yes, because the show is very, very eager not to have any more episodes. I don't hate Bran becoming king, I just hate that it doesn't mean anything. It's the most obvious moment of the faults in his stories, but I don't think it's really the one that ruined him. I think this is the culmination of everything. For me, it probably is writing him out of Season 5 and the knock-on effect of that. And if my theory is correct, that it does become so much harder to write an arc for him in Season 5 with Jojen already dead, then maybe that's the biggest moment. Jojen's sudden death and the lack of impact around it. You know, I expect a great deal of argument from the comments on this one. I feel like my opinions might be controversial, like there's another perspective here that I'm missing. So do let me know what you think. Good or bad comments. And like the video if you liked it. Subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, or check out my second channel that I've started recently with Kirsty. Otherwise though, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.